I'm not hearing anything. Is there?
I'm here. I'm just off mute.
Oh, hi. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Reverend. I thought maybe I wasn't hooked up.
I'm here.
I'll put-
No.
Okay, I think. All right, let's do what I've really been getting used to, and that is to make sure that things are being heard and seen online. So, let me get this minimized here. Here we go.
I'm finishing lunch, sorry.
That's okay. This is the day of acceptable behavior where otherwise it would not. You're totally fine, Laurie, don't worry. So, let me just make sure. Can I have people wave their hands if they can hear me? Look good, okay. I'm gonna do gallery view for a second and make sure it all looks like it's where it needs to be. And it looks like we may give just one more minute. We had around 30 people signed up online. We're getting there. So we'll just wait a little bit longer. And
Quick question.
certainly,
Do we park in the spaces that say church parking only?
certainly, but if you park in the preacher spot, you have to preach next Sunday. Just know that. No, you don't have to. You can.
I'm in the preacher's spot.
Oh, it's the next to last one. So don't worry. No, you can park anywhere you want.
Lad came by with his license plate and he looked at me in my car and he hit the sign, like saying, get
Ooh.
out of here.
Uh-oh. Well, no, I think it's fine to park there. It's fine.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay. And for the people who are here in the sanctuary, this is a little bit awkward, but I'm going to be running all the tech from back here. So you're going to be looking forward at the screens, but probably not seeing me very much, except if you turn around. So anyway, I'll be back here, this voice from behind. Well, welcome. This is a very special moment that Faith and Climate Action Montana and our church, the First United Methodist Church of Missoula, are happy and delighted to sponsor a chance to kind of enter into, in an intentional way, the conversation that I think is on a lot of our minds and in a lot of our hearts about the status of creation, the status of our world. This is the Serenity prayer event, and it is largely focused upon a video preview, a private screening, I guess we should say, of the video that Reverend Michael Dowd has put together. He's online with us right now, and so he's going to be adding his voice to the panelists. And so just a few little protocol kinds of things. Laurie, thank you for that note, but we're just going to ask for people to stay muted as long as you're not speaking. That's kind of a challenge these days, but just to make sure that you have your microphone turned off would be very helpful to minimize disruptions. Also, you have a little, I think it's a reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's a way that we try to lift a hand or clap, or you can do all kinds of things. I haven't seen the somersault one yet, but you can do all kinds of things with those reactions. And we're going to try to use those to see if we can do a Q&A towards the end of the session. For those who are present here, it's been awkward. Our technology, I could not get the sound to go through appropriately the way our system was set up, so I had to adjust things, but it is working now. Yet it means our microphone setup is back here at the back of the church in the aisle. There's 2 microphones set up on a lectern, and so if you have a question, if you can come over to there and share your words, that would get across to the online audience. So, yeah, we're asking people to remain masked. We are trying to up the ante a little bit with the protocols, seeing that in Montana, our numbers are going higher and higher with COVID. And so we're trying to keep as safe as we can. I see the distancing is going well. People are separated out. I think we have about 8 people here. Is that right? Something like that in person. And it looks like we have around 25 online. So, so yeah, that's kind of the Zoom protocols and our welcome. And something else, as we do get going, I want to make sure that we take a moment to have a land acknowledgement. And we, as people of conscience and people who recognize the value of the history, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the horrific, to remember the history, recall the history, means to try to grow from that history. And so we have a land acknowledgement about where we have our living, our existence, and the history before us, much before us, that has been compromised in so many ways these days. So the land acknowledgement we'd like to share is this. We acknowledge that we are in the sacred homelands of the Salish, Kootenai, and Kalispel people. For centuries and millennia, indigenous peoples honored this land. They named its rivers and meadows, venerated its mountains, and cherished its abundance. We acknowledge and respect the sovereign tribal nations and peoples who have always lived here. And especially today, we honor the path they have shown us in caring for this place for generations to come. We have much to learn from those who went before us. And now we move into our theme. We move into our focus of our time together. And I'm looking at the screen and the camera, so I know I'm disjointed a little bit. I'm trying to monitor everything at the same time I'm speaking. But our theme, of course, is the Serenity Prayer, and a focus upon that methodology, that thought process, that way of approaching the realities that really do face us in our climate reality. I came across something that stunned me a couple weeks ago. I was just reading in journals, different things, as I often do. And this was a quote from geologist Marcia Bjornerud. I hope I said her name right. Marcia Bjornerud. And this was in the Orion magazine. She said, "We are realizing now that the scenery is going to start directing the play." That just stunned me, and I thought there was some accuracy in that. That the world is changing, and many of those changes are heart-wrenching, worrisome, anxiety-bearing, and yet we have this thing called hope. But what does that mean? What does that look like in terms of our present reality, but also moving into a more positive future? Is it possible? How do we wrap our minds around this? And today we're just delighted to have panelists with us that have some expertise in these areas, some ways of processing these dimensions of our existence today. And I'm going to introduce them with the help of PowerPoint, if we can make this all work. Let me get to where we need to be. And it's right here, I think. Okay. And it's not working, so let me just see. There we go. Okay. First of all, we have Gwen Langford as a panelist. She is the president and owner of Sapphire Strategies, a strategic communications firm based in Missoula and focused on providing support for effective constituency outreach. Gwen is a member of the Gros Ventre tribe of Fort Belknap and direct descendant of the Salish tribe. And I'm going to do this here. Each time I'm going to try to find Gwen. I think she's right here. And there's Gwen. Hello, Gwen. Just making sure that we have you on the picture and have you connected. Welcome. Good to have you here. And then, computer is, there we go. Very good. We have with us George Price. George has a 33-year teaching career, 10 years at Two Eagle River School, 3 years at Salish Kootenai College, and 20 years at the University of Montana, teaching Native American Studies, American History, and African American Studies. He retired in May of 2018. And George is a descendant of the Assonet Band of the Wampanoag Tribal Nation of Massachusetts. Welcome, George. We're going to see if I can find you on the big screen. And there you are. Let's see if I got you, but I'm trying to see. There we go. There's George. So something of that nature. Welcome, George. Welcome. Okay. And Laurie Franklin is with us as a panelist. Laurie is the rabbi of the Missoula Jewish Community of Congregation Har Shalom. She is a board member of the Montana Human Rights Network, a founding member of the Montana Association of Rabbis, a member of the Missoula County Public Schools I-Value team, and part of the steering committee of Truth to Power advocacy team. And let's see if I can find Laurie. Laurie, I know you're here. So there you are. Okay. All right, we got Laurie. We got Laurie. Very good. Oh, life is interesting when your media tech half doesn't know what he's doing. So anyway. And we have Ethel Mcdonald with us today. And I love this bio characterization. Ethel is a Missoula legend. I love that. She's a retired teacher and great-grandmother, well known in the circles of Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. She's a peacemaker within the center and a member of their coordinating council. She's recognized by Climate Smart in Missoula for her bicycle riding and community building. And we're going to try to find Ethel. There's Ethel. All right, Ethel, welcome, welcome. Good to have you here. And then we have Reverend Michael Dowd. Reverend Michael Dowd is the best-selling eco-theologian, TEDx speaker, and pro-science, pro-future advocate whose work has been featured in the New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Newsweek, Discover, and on television throughout the United States and Canada. His book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, noted skeptics, and religious leaders across the spectrum. And I'm going to make sure we can. There you are, right there. We got Michael. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And Michael, I think your presentation at my church, this church right here, was one of the first things I attended. It was before I was pastor of this church, when I was superintendent. And I just remember opening my mind so much more to the possibilities of thought regarding our realities. Thank God for evolution. I don't think I've ever heard that prayer before, but it was wonderful. So thank you. Very good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to shift things around here. And I'm not sure why. We're going to do this and here. Okay. There we are. We're moving right now into the video segment, and I'm going to be pushing buttons again and trying to get this rolling. There's several things I have to switch, so I really need to know if it's coming through. And so, you know, the sign that says it's not coming through, okay, so, or thumbs up for if it's doing okay. So here we go. Make sure I'm in the right place. For here, share, there, and I need to make sure we're sharing sounds, and I believe we're on.
Serenity Prayer for the 21st Century. Pro-Future, Love and Action. I'm Michael Dowd, and I'm recording this in June of 2021. Most of us are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. It was first penned by Reinhold Niebuhr, an American theologian in the 20th century. God, life, reality, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And a lot of people don't know this next section. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. Really, the Serenity Prayer is a path. Acceptance, that means trusting realities that we do not like and we do not want. For example, what the science is telling us is ongoing, likely, or inevitable, including our inner experience, our fear, our denial, our grief, and others. Changing what we can, the courage to change what we can. I call it post-doom, bold love and action. I like that better than activism, love and action. Investing in what is regenerative, what's redemptive, what's life-giving, what's pro-future, pro-nature, pro-community. And resisting what is anti-future, what's anti-nature, what's anti-community, such as much of what gets called progress and development. And then wisdom, combination of head and heart, two hemispheres of our brain, the rational and the relational. And when I say God-centered with the earth emoji in the middle, what I'm meaning is life-centered. It's an indigenous, pro-future, the 4 R's of right relationship to reality that I first learned about from Robin Wall Kimmerer: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and reverence. That's the essence of wisdom. So, accepting what we cannot change. I suggest that the first thing to accept is that most people will stay in denial as long as possible. In fact, we know this from previous collapsing civilizations, that most people never get it, they never wake up, most people stay in denial, and that denial can actually be an adaptive inattention. By denial, what I mean is the largely unconscious habit of thought, whereby we refuse to accept the reality of things that are bad or upsetting, or that challenge our worldview, our legacy, how we live, what is required of us, and or our feelings of self-worth or superiority. Denial is also the instinctual impulse to reject or discount information that calls into question our hopes, assumptions, or expectations about the future. We all are prone to denial. I am, you are, everybody that we know and love, so we can have compassion for ourselves and each other. And as I mentioned, often a helpful form of denial is adaptive inattention. We're not actually in denial, we understand climate or whatever, but we have to wake up each day being present to our kids or grandkids or our community, and so we adaptively don't pay attention. Accepting what we cannot change. No exploitative civilization has ever become sustainable. This is a difficult one to accept. Sustainable means faithful. It means faithful to the ancestors, faithful to the past, faithful to the descendants, the 7th generation, and faithful to the body of life upon which we depend. Sustainable civilizations, more or less sustainable, the first 95% of human history, 200,000 years or more, 10,000 or more generations. And it was all about safeguarding the well-being of the air, water, soil, and life, and everything upon which the society depended. The essential stance of virtually all pro-future, that is ecocentric or life-centered, land-honoring cultures, cultures that had the stance that we belong to the land, not the land belongs to us. The essential stance is this: wealth and well-being is measured by the year-by-year, decade-by-decade health and vitality of the soil, forests, waters, life, and everything the culture or society needs to survive and thrive. Unsustainable means exploitative. This is just the last 5% of human history, the last 8,000 years or 400 generations as opposed to 10,000 generations. And this is the basic pattern. The well-being of the elites and the ruling class, what gets called wealth and progress, goes up, while the well-being of the bioregion and the habitat carrying capacity, that's an ecological concept, real wealth goes down. And where they cross over, that's called overshoot. And this book by William R. Catton Jr., Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change, is the single most important book I've ever read in my life. My wife agrees, Derek Jensen, Paul Ehrlich, so many people consider this the most important book of the 20th century. This is the fundamental pattern, the ecocidal, self-destructive pattern of over 80 human-centered, anthropocentric civilizations. And you don't understand this if you don't understand energy, ecology, and history. I've spent somewhere between 20 and 50 hours a week for the last 8 years studying energy, ecology, and history. And that's what this presentation emerges out of. The BBC Futures series, Deep Civilization, back a couple of years ago, Luke Kemp wrote an article called "Are We on the Road to Civilizational Collapse?" And of course, he answered yes. And he had this incredible chart, 88 civilizations. Now, this is just 88 civilizations between 3000 BCE and 1000 of the Common Era, just that 4,000 year period. If you go back before 3000 BC, or you look at the last 1,000 years, it's well over 100. And what we've discovered is that collapse is a feature of civilizations. It's not a bug. It's a feature of all human-centered civilizations. In fact, the famous 20th century historian, one of the most famous of the 20th century, Arnold Toynbee, said great civilizations are not murdered. They take their own lives. So how civilizations commit ecocide, commit suicide? Well, again, this is just the last 5% of human history. And here's the basic pattern. Over 80 examples. Roughly, this takes anywhere between, as a general rule, 225 to 325 years. There's a period of progress, rise, boom, overshoot of carrying capacity. That is, we take more resources and we exude more waste than the systems can bear, and they start to break down. And then regress, fall, bust. And collapse, it turns out, is a process. It's not an event. It often takes many decades, sometimes a century or more. Joseph Brodsky was a famous Russian literature professor who taught in the United States and Canada, won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1987. And he famously said, "You Americans, you're so naive. You think evil is going to come into your houses wearing big black boots. It doesn't happen like that. Look at the language. It begins in the language." Classic example. What do we think of when we hear primitive or civilized? Well, these quotes call that into question. Forests precede civilizations, and deserts follow them. All of our exalted technological progress, civilization for that matter, is comparable to an axe in the hand of a pathological criminal. The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization. The earth is littered with the ruins of empires and civilizations that once believed they were eternal. These are powerful quotes. I also talk about language and how language matters enormously. In my Collapse 101, The Inevitable Fruit of Progress, I take a look at wealth, success, progress, and development. And then in Sustainability 101, Indigenuity is Not Optional, I take a look at God, religion, nature, and the environment. And it turns out how these words are defined, how these words are interpreted, can either lead us in a pro-future direction or an anti-future direction. For example, the environment is not our surroundings, as Thomas Berry used to say. The environment is our source, sustenance, and end. So no exploitative civilization has ever become sustainable. And those that believe that ours can, well, they're entitled to that. It's a faith claim. There's no evidence. Climate change is not our biggest problem. It's not our main problem. And progress is never eternal. Richard Heinberg said, our core ecological problem is not climate change. It is overshoot, of which global warming is a symptom. See, these are the things that activists, we activists and others focus on, rightfully so. These are horrific problems, challenges, tremendous challenges. And yet all of these are symptoms. They're symptoms of ecological overshoot. They're not the cause of our problems. They're symptoms. And ecological overshoot, of course, is caused by primarily how we define and measure wealth, well-being, and success, whether we do so in human-centered terms like individuals, corporations, and nations, their wealth or well-being, or life-centered. How well is the soil doing decade by decade? How well are the forests doing decade by decade? What are the other species doing decade by decade? What's the carbon in the atmosphere decade by decade? Only life-centered measures of progress and well-being are sustainable. Everything else is ultimately ecocidal. And again, if you only read one more book the rest of your life in terms of understanding our predicament, I encourage you to read William Catton's book, Overshoot. Rarely is the entire thesis of a book on the front cover. And Stuart Udall, the former Interior Secretary under the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, make sure you read the foreword by Stuart Udall. It is still, to this day, it was written in 1980, and it's still one of the best critiques of techno-utopian thinking. This quote from Catton, "Human society is inextricably part of a global biotic community. And in that community, human dominance has had and is having self-destructive consequences." Thomas Berry, William Catton and Thomas Berry are my two most significant male mentors. And Thomas Berry was one of the most significant ecological and evolutionary thinkers of the 20th century. And he said something very similar along the lines of William Catton. He said, The most difficult transition to make is from a human-centered to a life-centered norm of progress. If there's to be any true progress, the entire life community must progress. Any so-called progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself. And this makes total sense when you understand the nested nature of reality, that we are made up of smaller, creative, intelligent realities, and we are part of larger and dependent upon larger creative, intelligent realities. Our microbiome, for example, and the trees and the forests and other animals and plants and that sort of thing. And so what I mean by primary reality is everything inside us and everything outside us that we don't exist without. And it turns out that all indigenous, sustainable, truly sustainable cultures treat primary reality as primary and humans as dependent, as derivative. Unsustainable civilizations treat primary reality as merely a source of resources and a place for our waste. It is insane to define progress in terms of the rapid diminishment of everything we depend upon. So how we define progress and how we measure progress determines our behavior and what kind of a world that we're leaving our grandchildren and other species. Banking on techno-fix or political solutions will lead to catastrophic nuclear meltdowns and incalculable needless extinctions. Problems caused by economic growth and development will not be solved by more of the same. Indeed, our predicament will worsen. And understanding ecology, energy, and history undermines expectations that human ingenuity, technology, or the market can save industrial civilization. Turns out that ingenuity, technology, and the market are what got us into this mess. So accepting what we cannot change. Most people are going to stay in denial. No exploitive civilization has ever become sustainable, and climate change is not our main problem, and progress is never eternal. Technology and the market cannot save us from what they always cause. I just touched on that. Here's one more slide related to it. This book, Technofix, grounded in the history of technology. When you understand technology throughout all of human history, beginning with fire and spears that could kill animals at a distance, the first time in animal history that was possible, you learn some lessons. And here are some. Human technology that doesn't integrate with life's technology, with nature's technology, does more harm than good. It just does it over time. Technology in the context of ongoing economic growth does not promote sustainability, but hastens collapse. Most technological solutions to social and technology-created problems are counterproductive. And this book shows why new technologies tend to be uncritically accepted, who really controls the direction of change, and why technology expands and accelerates ecocide. Accepting that abrupt climate change, that's like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime, and biospheric collapse are already in runaway mode. They're already out of our control. This is painful to even try to accept. If you look at the last 270 years, the history of industrial civilization, and you just Google the Great Acceleration, you'll find all of these charts of biospheric collapse. It shows charts of all things getting better technologically, but it's leading to the collapse of everything we depend upon without exception. Collapse is a gradual downward trend that goes into out of control, runaway, unstoppable mode. It's not like the collapse of a building. This is the way ecosystems collapse and civilizations collapse. And the Great Acceleration, they talk about it mostly since 1950. That basically it's gone into runaway mode since 1950, and abrupt climate change has gone into runaway mode since 2000. And again, this is everything we depend on. I do a whole program on this where I go through this in great detail, but there's only been one major mass extinction where we've lost the forests and the insects, and we're actually adding carbon faster than that. There's not a single system that we depend upon that's not just in decline, but in precipitous free fall. This is the fact. The stability of the biosphere has been in decline for centuries and in unstoppable, out of control mode for decades. This great acceleration of Gaian collapse is an easily verifiable fact. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. Evidence is also compelling that the vast majority of people will deny this, especially those still benefiting from the existing order, those legitimately concerned about the consequences of collapse, and those who fear that accepting reality means giving up. And that paragraph is almost all of us. The history of 80 plus previous boom and bust, that is progress, regress, rise and fall societies, clearly reveals how and why industrial civilization is taking its own life. Paradoxically, acceptance may be the only thing that can help us not make a bad situation catastrophically worse. And this is especially true collectively. For example, if we don't cap the nukes and take the spent fuel rods out of the swimming pools, we will be committing evil on a geological timescale. If we assume industrial civilization has eternal life. And I don't expect you to take my word on this. I did 2 programs, each of them a little bit more than an hour. Irreversible Collapse, Accepting Reality, Avoiding Evil, I did at the end of December, and then I got some feedback, created an almost identical, 95% the same, just a few 5% improvements, or some people actually like the first version, but both of those cover this material in some depth, along with all the resources that I cite, the scholarship. None of us can accept these, none fully. I mean, it's that we don't want to accept these. We don't like these are repulsive. And yet most people will stay in denial as long as possible. In fact, don't be surprised if tomorrow morning you wake up and you think Michael Dowd is crazy. Again, adaptive inattention. If you got to wake up each day, you don't want to focus on this kind of stuff. And if you accept this, even if you mostly accept these, which are all evidentially factual, friends and colleagues may call you a doomer for giving up. And I suggest just love them. Don't take it personally, just love them. Because it's unavoidable that you will feel grief, sorrow, and fear. And I suggest we would all do well to honor our grief, sorrow, anxiety, and fear as gifts. In fact, my most significant female mentor is Joanna Macy. This is her latest book, A Wild Love for the World and the Work of Our Time. And this is a great quote. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger or fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. The depth of your grief is the measure of your love. You would not be feeling grief if you didn't feel love. And this quote from Stephen Jenkinson is powerful. He says, grief requires us to know the time we're in. The great enemy of grief is hope. Hope is the 4-letter word for people who are unwilling to know things for what they are. Our time requires us to be hope-free, to burn through the false choice of being hopeful or hopeless. They are 2 sides of the same con job. Grief is required to proceed. That's what I call post-doom. You have to go through doom to get to post-doom. But I've had 77 regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. People of all different ages and backgrounds and everything else. And I promise you, there's not a bad one. 77 amazing conversations with people who get the big picture, including the scariest of the stuff, have done the heart work and come through to inspired local love and action and how to be an inspiration to others. So I encourage you to check that out at postdoom.com. Here's the definitions. Post-doom. What opens up when we remember who we are, accept the inevitable, honor our grief, and prioritize what is pro-future and soul-nourishing. Post-doom is a fierce and fearless reverence for life and relative equanimity, even in the midst of abrupt climate change, a global pandemic, and collapse of both the health of the biosphere and business as usual. And post-doom is living meaningfully, compassionately, and courageously, no matter what. So let's conclude with courage to change the things we can. I love these quotes. Do not lose heart. We were made for these times. We need courage, not hope, to face climate change. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. Plant a garden. Meet your neighbors, practice generosity, learn new skills, control what you can, and leave the rest. I suggest that the courage to change the things we can starts with accepting the possibility of worst case, the possibility that we could go extinct this century, the possibility that things could collapse rather rapidly. You may only think it's a 10% possibility or maybe a 90% possibility, but if you don't accept that possibility, then that possibility has power over you. 11 years ago, I was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. I had a tumor the size of my fist in my spleen. And if the chemo hadn't worked, I was going to die in the next 8 to 10 months. And I came to peace with that possibility. And once I did, it took me a few days, but once I did, that possibility never had power over me. I was able to live fearlessly and live with a profound sense of gratitude for the past, trust in the future, and a profound love of life that I haven't lost, thank God. And really thankful that the chemotherapy worked, except the possibility of worst case. To practice self-restraint rather than self-indulgence, which is what our culture is all about. Less, I first got the LESS from John Michael Greer. We can all adapt to less energy, less stuff, and less stimulation. And I added the third S, sort of less with a lisp. We can all reduce suffering in the world. So practice with less energy, less stuff, less stimulation, and reducing suffering in the world. And promoting simplicity and degrowth. As Richard Heinrich says, all roads lead local and all roads lead to simplicity. Practicing self-restraint, all sustainable roads. Grow a garden. See, it's not about all degrowth, because we can grow a garden, grow community, grow awareness, and grow in our resolve to make a difference where we can with love and action. Nurture compassion for family, friends, neighbors, and adversaries. One of the things about this big picture that happens for so many of us is when we realize these patterns are thousands of years in the making, then the blame game just starts to evaporate. We have no need to blame the other side, and we can start having compassion for even the people on the other political side, other religious side, and what have you. Befriend mortality. One of the most important spiritual practices, to have death and your mortality and our mortality as an advisor. And then to get complete. Express care to the people you care about. Express gratitude to the people who have been a blessing in your life. And express regret to the people who you've harmed or betrayed or had some negative impact on. You can handwrite letters, pick up the phone, email, whatever, but communicating to people out of the blue, especially if there's people that you haven't talked to in a decade or two or three, expressing care, gratitude, and regret, you can make their month, you can make their season by doing that. It's getting complete with your life. Nurture community and engage with others in bold love and action. And then finally, support for all things regenerative. And each of us can be a moral stand for the future. Coming back, the wisdom is to help us discern what to accept and what to change. Trusting realities that we do not like, we do not want. Again, what's ongoing, what's likely or inevitable, including our inner experience. Courage, changing what we can. Post-doom, bold love and action. Investing in what is regenerative and redemptive, what's life-giving, pro-nature, pro-community, and resisting what is anti-future, what's anti-nature, what's anti-community, so much of what's called progress and development. And then head and heart wisdom, relational and rational, life-centered, Gaia-centered, God-centered. And then, as indigenous cultures teach us, pro-future 4 R's of right relationship to reality: respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and reverence. And I'll let Robin Wall Kimmerer have the final say. Robin Wall Kimmerer is one of the most amazing Native American elders and plant scientists. Her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is, I think, currently number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list, even though it was published 6 or 7 years ago. And then she records the audiobook in her own voice. And chapter after chapter brings me to tears when I listen to her recording it. And I love this quote: "Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it's not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us." If I died tonight, the stuff on the Post-Doom website, not only the 77 conversations, but this little playlist, Pro Future Wise Living, Beyond Hope and Fear, these 2 videos, the big picture, clarity, compassion, and love in action, and then Sustainability 101, Indigenuity is not optional. This is 2.5 hours total. They're both long videos, but they're broken into like 20-minute segments, and I encourage you to stop after each segment and take a break. But what I did in this little short video, I go to much greater depth in these 2 videos. So let's conclude with the Serenity Prayer. God, life, reality. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. Thank you.
Good. Let me see. And I'm trying to make sure.
That was nice that the technology worked well. Thank you.
Did it work? Okay, thank you for that. I was doing the technology prayer back here, trying to see if it was going to work. So, so much in that video, in that presentation, and we want to go right to our panelists for reflection, thought. And we had a kind of a dress rehearsal before where we kind of thought a good way to start this is to ask each of our panelists the same question. It's a two-part question. And the question given to each one of the panelists is, in our present day predicament, what brings you gratitude? What are you grateful for? And counterwise, what breaks your heart? We did not set up an order to this, so I'm going to gallery view it and see who waves their hand or shows the icon, and I will put you on the speaker view. So of our panelists, who would like to begin? And no volunteers mean I choose, so. Okay. Well, I do this with my clergy gatherings, and I follow my screen. So I'm going to do a clockwise thing on my screen, and the first person I see is Gwen. So Gwen, would it be okay if we asked you your thoughts on the two questions?
Sure.
So,
thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for taking this time on this beautiful Sunday to be here together. Thank you, Reverend Dowd. I appreciate your information and perspective, and it brings me to, I guess, probably something that I feel deeply grateful for, and that's just connection. I think that right now, I would say that the future, really, in order for us to survive, is about understanding our connection to each other and then figuring out how we can collaborate. And I think with that, probably the most important thing of being able to connect to each other is being vulnerable to each other in a way, because when we put up the walls and the facade of disconnection and believing that we're actually separate from each other, that's when we're not able to put out those soft spots and to invite others to meet us in connection. And I think that's probably something that breaks my heart the most, is the fallacy of disconnection, or the fallacy of other that we think as we go through our world. And so it brings me a lot of hope to be here together. And every time I get an opportunity to connect with people, and especially in something that's organized like this, I think of it almost as a template. And it's a template that I can call upon in the next few days for the rest of today. It's a template that will be burned in my mind, although it's a gallery view of connection. It's still lovely that we've all taken this time to be here together and to try to put our soft hearts out to meet one another, especially in this time that's so difficult, in the time that we feel scared. And those are the times when you are the most vulnerable, I think. When you're feeling strong and you feel like you can do it all alone, those are not the times necessarily that it's as hard to be vulnerable with each other. So I think it's during these times when we are feeling a little bit brought to our knees and we can come together in a way that's vulnerable and connect with each other. I think that's the beauty of it. And it's a template that I'll call upon as I continue to go on this path. So those are some of the things that I think of right offhand. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you. For some reason, I can't get the view to do the right thing. So I'm going to try this again. But Gwen, what I heard you say is it's miserable to feel bad alone. It's less miserable to feel bad together in a sense. It's not commiseration necessarily, but to have people who are way down the same way, well, you can lean on each other a little bit and see where you go. And thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to go then to my screen, the next person, and I'm going to try to get the view to go right. I have Ethel as the next person. So Ethel, let me see if I can get this to do.
Okay, I unmuted myself.
Okay, there, it's doing the same thing. I can't get, do you all see three of us now? Is that, or do you see one? Or,
Usually you see just the one who's talking if that's the way you set it up. So
good, I'm seeing three of us. So, okay, I'm glad. If Ethel's up, there you are, Ethel. So, welcome. The question, yes.
okay. I'm grateful for all the people and circumstances that brought me where I am now. Very healthy. I can hike and bike and lead an active life and enjoy this wonderful area we live in. I'm grateful for family, friends, the Missoula community, and now some online communities like this one that keep me centered in values of compassion and caring. Most grateful of all for the beautiful environment of Missoula. The fact that we have the mountains, the usually clean air and water. And I just love the earth, and I am so grateful for the earth. So what breaks my heart then is the prevalence of greed and consumption and exploitation, which is destroying our earth and the lives of people who suffer from the terrible inequalities in basic needs like food, shelter, basic rights, and safety. And so when I look at the Serenity prayer, I actually, two things stand out to me, of several actually, but one is this idea that we need courage and not hope, that hope is, hopeless, I guess. For years, I can tell you when, since 2005, I have lived by the words of Jim Wallace, who said, hope, action keeps hope alive, and hope keeps action alive. And so I've been an activist for peace and environment and climate change, all the good things, for a long time. And also, by Kathy Kelly's words, courage, we catch courage from one another. But I'm really now realizing that hope is not what I should be living with. It should just be courage. And I can accept the, hopelessness of our situation and accept that. And I have already, in a sense, adopted my own kind of serenity, which is to, thanks to my mentor, Betsy Mulligan-Dagg, live by Gandhi's words, be the change. So I'm concentrating on being the change and recognizing that's the only thing I can really change, is my own footprint on the earth, my own actions, and that I can accept that I can't really change anyone else's mind or the larger picture. So that's my little spiel on.
Very good, very good. I heard something there that made me think maybe the issue of hope is hoping to have the courage to face whatever comes. Because sometimes hope tries to fixate upon a particular outcome, but when you don't know anything about the outcome in many ways, or can't see the hopefulness of that, to have courage to face whatever may come, you hope to have the courage. Anyway, I really like that, Ethel. So, okay.
Thank you. And I should say, I forgot to say that actually that it isn't all negative when I do this, accepting, because I am finding that I can take joy in being the change.
Yes, excellent. That's such a good point. to be the change, as Gandhi said. So yeah, thank you, Ethel. Wonderful. I just realized none of our screens here are working, are they? You're hearing the voice, but you're not seeing what's happening. Let me see if I can quickly get the PowerPoint shut down, because I think that's what's blocking it. Sorry about this. And it's not letting me do it. Okay, yeah, I think we got it. Okay. Learn on the go. So now we've got the next panelist I have George Price. And so George, we welcome your thoughts about the two-part question. And let me see if we can get you on there. Yeah.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. Okay, well, thank you all, and just happy to see everybody here, people who are courageous enough to face these very difficult issues together. And I look forward to our time of interaction. And I was told to keep this segment down to 2 minutes, so I'm going to go for it and not excel just these two questions that were given to us. What are we grateful for, and what breaks our heart? And also I want to say thank you, Michael, for your wonderful videos and all that you've given us too, and everybody here. I am grateful for what it still remains, what we still have of our source of life, the natural world, and for the possibility that we can do better at living in sync with and in harmony with our source of life and do less harm. No matter what it is that we need to accept that we can't change. And we don't know completely yet. Much will be revealed as we go forward. And we don't know then also exactly what it is to have the courage to go on, the courage that we can change. And I'm thankful that you introduced the light of the Indigenous perspective as our way of going forward. Because in our traditional Indigenous perspectives, we live in harmony and under the guidance of all of our relations in the natural world and spiritual, physical, every being in the natural world, whether we have hope or not. That is our guide. And so that continues to be the way to live, no matter what everybody else is thinking or reasoning can be done. We just live. We live by the ways that our ancestors and all the beings have shown us. And we've, of course, forgotten so much due to colonialism, due to the apocalypse that came to our ancestors. And I'm glad that you mentioned Wildcat's work, and there's another young Native scholar who's saying the same thing. And I'm sorry about Daniel Wildcat and Nick Estes. So yes, we've been there before, not this same apocalypse, another one. And we've been in dystopia. And I define a dystopian society as one that destroys our source of life. We've been there. We are there. This is dystopia. So it's not a choice between something that's acceptable, good, utopia, or dystopia. It's moving forward to the best world we can live in away from dystopia. Those are the two choices. So I'm grateful that these are our possibilities. My heart breaks at the suffering of the innocents, all the beings who did not bring this upon us, who are in most cases the first to suffer the ills of what the Anthropocene, anthropocentric humanity has done to the world. That's what breaks my heart. Whether it's my own grandchildren, the trees, the flowers, the water, all of our relations, all of life that has devoted itself, all the natural world devoted itself to making life continue, constantly giving, generous beings. And this is how we repay them, by continuing to destroy the world. I think that's probably 2 minutes. Got your timer on, John?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
It's very
sir.
generous. It's okay. We're being generous, but we're doing fine. So,
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, George. That was great.
Thank you all.
you bet. You bet. You make me think about the word reversals, that we reverse the way things should be in a general sense, and that we're looking at, what does it mean to have a reversal, maybe not even of the physical realm, but spiritual, attitudinal. And anyway, excellent food for thought, George. Thank you. I'm still not quite doing the gallery thing right, but we have now before us Rabbi Laurie Franklin. I'm going to try to get
Once she starts speaking, it'll probably feature her.
I think you're seeing something I'm not, because I got all people on the screen, and we're all seeing everybody, all the panelists, which is wonderful. But I can't highlight one person. So, but Laurie, you're on. So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
The two-part question, yes.
Speaking of gratitude, thank you. There's so many layers of gratitude that are in this day for me. One of them was just waking up this morning. Mm-hmm. Another one is just being in this room full of people. I recognize a lot of names on the windows. There's a lot of names I don't recognize yet. And just feeling gratitude for being in your good company, and especially the people that are on the panel that I'm going to learn a lot from you, but I think I'll also learn from the Q&A. I have a lot to learn. And, but when I was thinking about this question, what makes me grateful? I tend to think of how I wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night. I go to my back door, actually, the back door on the porch of my house, and I stick my nose out and I smell the air. And then about maybe 20 yards from my house, or from the porch, is the gate to the vegetable garden. And I've been a farmer in the past, but I'm just a vegetable gardener now. And I love growing vegetables. What can I say? I like eating them. I like cooking them. I like seeing them sprout. I like paying attention to what they do while they grow. This is, to me, like one of life's great joys. And I like seeing the light. I'm grateful for the light bouncing off the trunks of the trees. Even in the winter when they have no leaves, it's even more vivid, that light bouncing off and just illuminating everything around them. And 2 days ago, there was a little miracle that showed up at my window, which was, I look at the window screen in the living room, and there is a praying mantis on the screen. I think it's the first one I've seen living here. I've seen them before. Back when I lived in New York State, I used to see some praying mantises and walking sticks in the backyard. They're amazing insects. And I felt like it was a little bit of a message to me. I felt like I was being given a message that, this world that I live in is, even in spite of its profound difficulties, there is vitality in it. that I could have this visitor on my screen for a few hours. And I was hoping he was going to lose his head, you know, because it was the male, it was small, and which means he would mate, you know. And so I was hoping that his future involved losing his head, you know. Anyway, so those are the kind of things that give me such profound joy, such profound gratitude that I get to observe and I get to participate in some way. And yeah, that's in a simple way. That's where I see I have great gratitude. What breaks my heart is partly what George was alluding to, just the suffering of the innocents. I mean, I'm repeating him because I don't think I could say it any better. It breaks my heart that as our sustaining matrix falls apart, that people and creatures will suffer. And, you know, we're going to talk about more of this later, but I've really been focusing on this quote by Joanna Macy, "The depth of your grief is the measure of your love." That's a pretty powerful quote. And I want to bring something about it later from the Talmudic tradition. But so that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Oh, very good.
That's
very
awesome.
good.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, you and the highlight, just writing things down like right and left, how important life-giving practices or attitudes are to us at times when things are seen beyond our control or the hopelessness seems to be what we're grappling with. So thank you, Laurie. Thank you for sharing. Yes. And then going to the Reverend Michael Dowd. Let me see if I can make this work again. Nope. So we're going to do it this way. There we go.
That's,
Michael. Yes.
that's fine, John. This is great. If you put your cursor on the very top right and click instead of gallery, click on speaker and see if that makes a difference.
Yes, and I think you're probably seeing it. I'm doing that each time, but it's not showing up on my screen. Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So.
Well, I know that I would love to hear. I mean, there was a 25-minute video, so y'all are understanding where I'm coming from, and each of the four panelists represents just an entire tradition of wisdom and ecologically grounded heart and mind space. And so what I would love is to not share any more of my stuff, but I'd like to hear each one of you just share anything that you're led to, not related to gratitude or where your heart breaks, but just anything that either was inspired or catalyzed by the video, or just anything that you would like to say from your tradition's ecological wisdom that's relevant to the people on the 35 people on this call that you think would be useful or inspiring or helpful or supportive.
I'll say some things, if that's okay. I step in. You know, one of the questions that I have had, and I think we all struggle with, is kind of the how. You know, how can I make connection with somebody? And I think deeply part of that is about reciprocity. And the question is always, is somebody worthy of me seeing the divinity in them? And I've come to realize as I get older and I've had more and more experience in this life, and I'm still a newbie in many ways, especially as a tribal person. I'm certainly not an elder by any means, but even with the heartbreak and the life and just the different challenges that I've experienced in my lifetime, one of the things that I feel like is becoming clearer to me is that the work starts with me. It starts deeply in me first. And when I say that, it's about me understanding my own divinity. I think about the time when my children were born. I've got 2 daughters. And the moment that they came out of my body and they took their first breath, it's such a moment of anticipation. It's such a moment of excitement. But it's really a miracle. And you know that when you're having a baby and they take their first breath, it's really a communion of their spirit and their body. And you're witnessing a miracle. And you're witnessing divinity. It's at the point that our breath leaves our body, and that our body, this temple, goes back into the earth, but our spirit is the part that's incredibly divine. And it's really it's a sign from Creator that you've got divinity. And so for me, what I keep on coming back to, especially as I go through challenges and I go through even reconciling and understanding my own worth and my own divinity, is remembering that I too was touched by Creator and that I have breath. And that alone is a sign of my divinity. And so, the question always is, as you go into the world and you're working amongst and amidst people, are they worthy? We make a lot of snap decisions. And I think there's a test that you've got to do. You've got to come up to people and you've got to decide, are they worthy? Are they worthy of me seeing and hearing them and thinking of their humanity and recognizing their divinity? And the test is to just see if they're breathing. And the tricky part is that there certainly are a lot of people who are not aligned with the way I think, and they may even be violent towards me, and they may even think that I don't deserve to live and that the way I am is not worthy. But I would certainly be doing a disservice. And the reciprocity comes from knowing deeply that because I have breath and because I have these gifts that Creator has given me, that my obligation then, as I go and use my breath and as I live and work in the world, if I can't see that in myself and if I can't understand that in myself, then I'm not going to see it in others. And the minute that I can't see it in somebody else, by virtue of just them holding breath and them being here, then the reciprocity is that I can't see it in myself then. That's the mirror of reciprocity. And it's difficult. And I know that a lot of times the work is about how can I still see somebody's humanity and know that they're worthy as a human and they deserve the dignity that I can afford them by hearing them and seeing them, but yet still have a boundary with them because maybe they don't necessarily wish me the best. And that's difficult work, and I don't mean to demean it. But I think, again, the more that I continue to go in the world, the more I realize that I have to have that deep embodiment of myself first. Because it's kind of like, the old saying, you can't love others until you love yourself. And until you recognize your own and you understand what that is to have that breath and that gift and the communion of spirit and body in yourself, then you can never see it in others. And in an Indigenous perspective, the picture that I always give is that we actually are all part of a circle. We're all points on a circle. And again, by virtue of me having breath, Creator has put me as part of that circle. And He also has put into my heart the gifts that I can offer into that circle. And part of the mutuality and the reciprocity is that I understand and I honor my gifts because I know them. And then when I honor those, I'm sharing them with the rest of the circle. But I also know, and the reciprocity comes from the fact that every person is also doing that. And I can trust that every other person as well, because I know it in myself, they're doing the same. And we're so much stronger when we can all offer our gifts. And that's, at the heart of the word tribe even, is knowing that there's no way I can hold everything and then I can do everything. I'm certainly gifted and I am divine. But yet I may not be the best at one component that's necessary for us to live a rich and whole life. And the times when I'm not as strong and I may not be at the forefront of that particular needed part of living, I can guarantee that somebody on the other side of the circle is going to have the strength. And part of what they're offering is they're going to hold me when I'm not as strong. And I think that's a really important component of thinking again and making connection with people and being collaborative with people. One thing that's also really interesting that just always makes me think again about a worldview that's different and how we have to start kind of thinking in a different way is in most Indigenous languages, there's an animacy or an animation afforded in most of the language of everything. So in a very anthropocentric language like English, the only being or kind of the animacy that we have for the most part, is attributed just to humans. I think sometimes we might attribute it to animals and sometimes to plants. But again, the worldview in an indigenous language is that everything is being, everything has a being to it. And it's really, again, a worldview of when I talk about that circle and recognizing the beauty and the gifts that everyone is offering to that circle, I'm not just talking about my neighbors who are humans, but I'm also talking about the water. I'm talking about my brothers and sisters, the animals. I'm talking about the plants. Those also are beings, and they're also, and especially the natural world. I'm a part of it, but I don't have dominion over it. And the generous gifts that are offered to me, and the generosity that's offered into that, again, that reciprocity and the mutuality of that is just something to behold. And so it's one of the ways that I have to remember sometimes when I feel frustrated, especially when I feel scarcity, when I'm feeling fear, is I have to come back to myself. I have to come back to myself a million times a day. And I have to remember my own divinity. And when I know that in myself, then I can know it in others, and I can connect to others, and I can see their worthiness. Because when I know that my voice and what I'm offering is valuable, then I can see across from me, and I can hear across from me, and I can see you and I can hear you. And I know then that you're valuable as well. And I think that's such an important part of this time that we're coming in with limited resources, is knowing everyone's offering their gifts. And that's the nature of this. Our resources are changing, but even more so with limited resources, it's even more important to understand our connection and the possibility for collaboration. So.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Two really cherished colleagues, David Abram and Paul Kingsnorth, both ecologically grounded authors who also really understand language. Both of them have referred to English as the language of ecocide because it doesn't give any relationality in the language to the greater than human world. Thank you for that. Laurie?
May I say something?
Sure, Claudia. And then Laurie, Rabbi Laurie's going to share.
Okay. I really appreciated what Gwen said, but I want to say what really motivates me is that I am a citizen of the earth. And as a citizen of the earth, that gives me my grounding. I am a citizen of Missoula and Montana, but first I am a citizen of the earth, and that gives me my place. Thank you.
Yes. Rabbi Laurie?
Hello. Gwen, that was so gorgeous. Oh my gosh. You know, and thinking about language, I mean, I had a few notes for myself before we came on today, just about the things that maybe I could bring. And I'm looking at the Hebrew Bible here. I'm looking at Genesis, which is Bereshit, means beginning, in beginning. And it's in that first chapter, there's a horrendous mistranslation that I think has been propagated to be a culture destroyer. And I'm gonna run this by you. You know, I wasn't sure I was gonna do this, but heck, we're right in it. So let's say this. First of all, it goes to exactly what Gwen was saying, talking about our divinity. God says, let's create the human being in our image, you know, like ourselves, and you know, B'Tselmo, B'Tselem Elohim, and B'Domato, and it's just such an important B'Domatenu, you know, in our according to our example, and it's like Creator Spirit saying, I share this aspect with all life, actually, but the human being in particular. But then the next things, you know, the next in verse 26, the English says, they shall rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the... The word is yered. with the yarad, which is a 3-letter root, and it means go down. And so you can read this, they can go down upon, but that's not what it says. It's go down with, with. And so the human being must go down with all of the creatures of the world and grasp what they're about. And the next, a couple verses later in 28, the English says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase and fill the earth and master it. Master, that word, Gwen, you said dominion so many times, have dominion over them. The Hebrew, it's a 3-letter root, kavash. What does it mean? Well, it can mean to conquer. It can mean to capture, but it can also mean to conserve, to self-control, to restrain the self. A very different meaning, and yet this twisted meaning of conquer and rule is what we have carried forward in our English language versions. Even my English language version of my Hebrew, is making this profound, what I think is a problem of translation. And I think civilizations, human civilizations who are book oriented have made the mistake of carrying this forward in a way that there is a misunderstanding of our human role. And so that's something I wanted to add. I'll stop there. Somebody
That's
else.
great. Thank you so much, Laurie. That's perfect.
Other thoughts, other things that intersected with your processes in terms of the realities we face in these days, and how do you find that serenity? Yes, Michael. Yeah.
Well, since Ethel has a member of the larger family of life sitting on her lap, I thought she might care to share a little bit.
Good.
Thank you very much. Really, animals, yes. I have friends who animals are absolutely their top priority. And I find this particular little animal is very tops for me. But very much, we are connected to all living beings, and maybe the not living as well when we look at the wonders of the earth. And that connection, whether it's among humans, animals, the plants, it all is the web of life that we are all a part of. And we just have to do what we can to not destroy, to litter that web of life, but rather to treat it as the sacred thing that it really is.
Amen.
There's a word you make me think about, Ethel. The word is holistic, but there's two spellings, WHOLISTIC or HOLISTIC. One speaks of wholeness, the other one speaks of the holy. I just wonder if it's not kind of the synthesis of those two. Anyway, interesting thoughts. Thank you, Ethel.
George, would you like to share again?
Okay, thank you so much. I want to be very brief again because I'm interested in the questions that others may have and like to go there. But two things I thought of mentioning, and one is in the indigenous oral traditions, all the creation stories, all of the first stories. There are some stories about the ending of worlds, but they're always followed by the beginning of a new world. And so I'd like to put that out there for people to meditate on. I know I don't have time to tell any of those stories right now, but that's the one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to thank you for, Michael, is all of the great books that you've recommended. And I've already started reading and purchased some of them and all that. But as a former academic and a indigenous person, I'd like to say that practice, interaction with the earth, the ways of living that the old timers used to know is even more valuable than theory and what this dystopian world values as wisdom. So all the Nobel Prizes and accolades and all of that, you got to remember who's handing out those prizes and promotions in academia, the whole thing that I lived within for 20 years and was almost captured by at one time in my life. Wisdom in the traditional sense is knowing how to take care of the gifts that are given to us in our interconnected natural world that Gwen was talking about so eloquently. And Gwen's a wise young indigenous woman and understands this. We have to learn from nature first. Nature being our true home, our true source of life. And I'll read the books, I'll listen to humans still, but I want to spend more time listening to plants and water and birds and all of the voices that I neglected during my time of captivity in the dystopian world. The time I spent pursuing an academic career. That was in a lot of ways a big distraction. I made the most out of it for good, but boy, what a dangerous world that was. And I'll have to talk about that later. The last thing I'll say is I'm writing something now, and yeah, I write too, as well as read books. And that's just another part. But what wasn't said earlier in the introduction is I'm a permaculture organic farmer and have been going back to 1970 when I was an 18-year-old hippie communalist, So that should be known by the people listening here. So I learned more doing that kind of interaction with nature than reading a human written book. I'm writing something about re-examining the concept of utopia because I think we are at a time about going forward and the wisdom to know the difference and all of that cries out more than ever for utopian creativity. And the way that we have to start with that is unlearn the false definition of utopia that wasn't the definition that Thomas More, who invented that word, gave. He didn't say it was perfect and didn't say it was impossible. The ruling class jumped on that as soon as it was published and said, well, we can't have people doing this kind of alternative society creating. It's got to be dismissed. And the best way to dismiss it is to say, oh, that's perfectionism. That's impossible. Don't even go there. I'm writing about that. So that's something that's been on my mind in connection with what we're talking about here. And now I'd like to hear from people in the audience or our other guests and members of this conversation.
Thank you, George. So yeah, if anybody has a question, either from me or one of the panelists, you can put your cursor down by the reactions, and then if there's a hand, it says raise hand. Or if you want, you can just do this, and then you'll need to remember to unmute yourself.
You bet. And this will also apply to people who are here in the sanctuary. We have the microphone over here, and if you'd like to venture forth towards there or whatever, I'll try to switch you in when it's time. So thank you.
Okay,
I'm
great.
looking for hands.
So I see a phone number, 406-240-0610. You got your hand up. You got to need to unmute yourself.
Okay. So we're going to, there we go.
Okay, well, yeah, go ahead, Karen, since you were highlighted. I can't, there we go. Okay, so that person with the 406 number just unmuted themselves. Yes, go ahead and ask your question. Yes.
Oh, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay, you raised your hand. That's fine. Okay, thanks.
Oh, I don't know how to do it. Sorry.
Well, that's okay, no problem. Yeah,
that's okay.
And this is Karen was next, is that right? Or
Karen?
Yeah, that was me. I was wondering what you would recommend to the youth in particular, who are now more than half of them convinced that in the next couple of decades they're all going to die, and how we can address their concerns and their emotional needs as they look towards how they're going to construct their future, how they're going to move into their iffy futures with some energy and some capability of coping emotionally. I was just happened upon a Missoula counselor who moved to New York City and was posted today on Facebook, Rebecca Weston, who was interviewed by Bloomberg Press, and they were focusing on the shift in the media and on people's awareness of how dire circumstances have gotten. And her psychological counseling focus now is on climate counseling and reactions. She mentioned 2 people who had changed their careers, who felt they couldn't sustain the careers that they had enjoyed previously. So anyway, any ways that you can address how we might help our youth cope?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, Karen. My approach when I speak with youth is, first of all, to try to assist them in coming to terms with the fact that virtually all of human history, we didn't have the sense of entitlement for decades. I mean, in virtually all of human history, you lived knowing that if you had a bad harvest, you or some family members could die that winter. There wasn't the sense that we are entitled to many decades of life. That's a relatively new thing, and it's largely fossil fuel made possible. And so to recognize, because it's so easy for youth to feel really understandably upset and angry and judgmental and bitter, all that's totally understandable, but it's not particularly useful for their quality of life. So one is to remind them that most of human history, the future was precarious, and that the sooner that they can accept that their life is probably going to be shorter than their parents and grandparents, and potentially a lot shorter. I'm trying to, almost with everybody, of any age, I'm trying to help them see that I don't see the situation as dire. I don't see the situation as an emergency. It's just too late for that. The situation is over. The likelihood that there's any human beings at all 30 years from now, I would put it less than 10%. That's just based on runaway feedbacks, things that are already out of our control. For example, I created something for a news outlet just yesterday that no matter how massive and effective is civil nonviolent disobedience, no matter who or which party is voted into or out of public office, no matter how many people change their habits, become vegan, stop flying, or whatever, no matter how many seriously, seemingly miraculous artificial intelligence driven technology advances are made, no matter how successful we are at instituting a Green New Deal, no matter how many people shift to renewables or how effective some countries are at achieving quote unquote net zero emissions, no matter how many accords are signed or pledges or agreements made, no matter what laws are enacted, there's already a dozen or more tipping points that are already in the rearview mirror. In other words, these are things that are 2 or 3 decades already into unstoppable, rapidly increasing and cascading out of control mode. And here are 6. The loss of the world's ice. There's nothing we can do to stop the loss of the Arctic, Greenland, West Antarctica, mountain glaciers, and just that could potentially lead to, if there were no other tipping points, just that in itself could potentially lead to not just our extinction, but actually the extinction of most mammals that aren't small enough to burrow into the ground. Methane belching in the permafrost, the methane hydrates, the methane clathrates, the wetlands. Methane is already in runaway mode. There's nothing that we can do to slow or stop or reverse the methane that's coming out. Even if somehow we miraculously stopped all emissions tomorrow, emissions of methane and greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide will continue to rise just because of what's already in runaway mode naturally. The ocean acidification, ocean deoxygenation, and at least 25 feet of sea level rise are already baked in. If everybody went extinct tomorrow, or if everybody got enlightened tomorrow, we can't stop that. The conflagration of the world's forests. Basically every year, virtually every year, there may be one year that's a setback or slower, but virtually every year, wildfires, just like the last few years, bigger, more intense, more acreage, more pollution. And in fact, just the burning of the forests is adding more carbon dioxide. So again, even if we shut down all emissions, that's going to continue. Most of the world's forests are going to burn in the next 20 or 30 years. Consequently, the loss of most animal and plant species on land and in the lakes, rivers, and oceans, and then increasingly severe and deadly winter, storms, floods, hurricanes, droughts, and wildfires. So all of these are in runaway. So the sooner that a young person cannot fight and be desperate and be angry and frustrated, but it's kind of like we're all a part of a dead man walking. Industrial civilization has a terminal condition. Humans, Homo sapiens may not go extinct, but Homo colossus absolutely is going extinct. And the sooner that young people can accept that and realize, okay, they might have 5 to 20 years to live. How are they going to live life fully? How are they going to be the biggest contribution to their communities? How are they going to live with as much love and passion for life and courage as possible, knowing that it's very, very, very unlikely that things are ever going to get back to normal, or that they're going to be able to live the way their grandparents lived in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so my whole life is devoted to helping people move through doom to get to post-doom, and then live the rest of their life in this place of post-doom inspiration, local love and action.
So you had mentioned at one point somewhere that controlling or getting rid of the nuclear disaster that might happen is something that the kids or the future has to tend to, starting like yesterday.
Amen. Anything that young people can do to be pro-future, building topsoil, helping to ensure as few nuclear meltdowns as possible, assisting trees and plants and shrubs in migrating, regenerating soil, regenerating ecosystems. There's just tons of really good pro-future work that obviously aren't going to save everything, but they could very well increase the odds of some species making it through, and increase the odds of as few geological scale evil, like the toxic chemicals and the toxic nuclear stuff. So yes, there's no shortage of great work that people get into. But if young people think that all we need to do is lobby hard enough for our politicians to shift over to wind and solar, that's the wrong message. And ultimately, they're going to just be frustrated when they finally realize it may be a year or 2 or 5 or 6 years down the road. But at some point, they're going to realize that problems solved by technology in the market, or problems caused by technology in the market, can't be solved by any Green New Deal or anything of the sort. And this is a very unpopular message. I totally get that. So Julie's had her hand up for quite a while. Julie Hurst, you got to take yourself off mute.
Good
Go ahead,
afternoon.
Julie.
Good afternoon. I want to tell you all how much I appreciate you letting me pop in on this. I get a newsletter from the Missoula UU congregation. I live here at 7 feet above sea level on the East Coast in a city that's going down fast. Norfolk, Virginia. I have water in my basement right now. Wow. I can't remember how long ago it was because the pandemic has totally destroyed my sense of time. But I did take a long course with you, Reverend Dowd, about pro-future faith. And I have been working my way through doom and gloom, and I'm deeply into grief.
Yes.
Using my UU values, I have, these are the things that I'm doing to deal with that. Number one, I am encouraging young people especially, but anyone that will listen to me, and I don't lay a bunch of we're all going to die stuff on them, but I beg them to prepare themselves to be the survivors and the builders after the pandemic in the first steps and after the collapse that we see is coming in next, that we need some folks that might be able to create a sustainable human society post-doom. That's not real popular with my friends. The other thing I do is I bring it right home to my little city patch of 50 by 100 feet in my little city neighborhood. And I do everything I can do to build soil, to plant native plants, to personify my trees, like you told us to do, Reverend Dowd. I speak to my Magnolia grandiflora every morning and greet her with love, and I whisper to my squirrels and greet the sun. So that is a comfort to me. And it's important to me that I am comforted a little bit, so that I hope that even though I'm of a certain age, I can be maybe one of the wise ones at the end after the pandemic to help people create a healthy and sustainable life. Those are the little things that I'm doing here.
That's awesome, Julie.
Down at
Thank
sea
you so
level.
much. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that we just understand historically, when we look at previous collapsing and collapsed empires and civilizations, is that quite often it seems to be the norm that heroes, sheroes, saints, and sages, there are people, not the majority by any stretch, but there are people who just step forward and are truly heroic in their service, in their love, their generosity, their compassion, their leadership, local leadership, usually. And so there will surely be young people that step into that, people of all ages. But yeah, thank you for setting that example.
And Michael, we have a question here in the sanctuary too. So I'm gonna
go for it.
Switch microphone and camera and see if we can make this work.
Well, should I just speak?
Yeah, go right.
Okay.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
I can hear you quite well.
Hello, panelists, and thank you so much. I've learned a lot today. I've really enjoyed this presentation. I wonder if people are remembering that much of the disasters and the shifting that Gaia's doing and the cleansing she's doing have been foretold. This is not news. The Hopi Prophecy is one book that I used as a Bible. And the predictions of Edgar Cayce about both of the coasts going into the sea. This is happening. These are not new events. Some people who have had their radar up and have been open to higher wisdom and higher knowledge from other cultures like the Hopi and like Edgar Cayce, who was a prophet, a sleeping prophet. We've known about this for quite a while. It's still devastating. It's still scary. It's still what we want to prevent. But there is a lot of we have a lot of promise, especially with the youth that are showing an interest and caring. And we have a lot of knowledge that we need to draw upon from those who've already foretold these things, who have known and told us. And if we're not listening, then you said in your presentation, often it's denial, and it's almost a suicidal, blanking out of the information that we have had all this time. The question I wanted to ask was about the polar shift. What happened with the polar shift? Does anyone have an answer for me? Because this was another foretold thing that would happen to the Earth. We would have a polar shift, and that would cause a lot of the climate changes and things that have happened. Is that something that anyone can tell me has already taken place or is going to take place?
Yeah, thanks for, what is your first name?
Kat.
Kat. Thank you for that, Kat. Yes, I'm quite familiar with and deeply honoring of many of the prophetic voices, both indigenous, such as the Hopi and others, in the past that have foretold cataclysm and age of consequences and things like that. Related to specifically the pole shift, the magnetic and the pole shifting. I just read something literally yesterday on this from I think it was Astronomy magazine. It was one of these sort of astronomical magazines. And apparently there is some real concern that we are in the midst of, again, these things take time and not usually a human lifetime, but there seems to be in the last 15 years, there is a greater shifting of the magnetic pole. And I think I seem to recall, I don't remember exactly, but it's something like 26 miles a year that it's moving. And so the thought is that we could be very close to a magnetic pole shift. Now, one of the interesting things is they tend to be very disruptive, but they're disruptive in uneven ways. And they don't tend to correlate with mass extinctions as such. So it's not likely to cause a mass extinction, although we're already causing that. But it is likely to play serious havoc on our GPS systems and on many animals that use the magnetic as ways of migrating. So yes, from what I understand, we are in the early stages or perhaps mid stages of precisely one of those right now.
Thank you.
We are about almost 15 minutes over our allotted time, but what I thought we might do is just take one last circuit of the panelists. Is there anything else that
We can't hardly make out what you're saying, except that I think you mentioned that we're now about 15 minutes over. Is there any either burning question that somebody has, or is there a final words that I'd love to invite each of the panelists to take, 1 or 2 minutes and share something, whatever their heart leads them to share as a way of bringing this experience to completion.
I forgot to switch microphones. Is this better now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you, Michael. And that's exactly what I said. So yeah, any of the panelists wish to share?
Well, I'll jump in without raising my hand. This is Ethel. I just, one final thing. I've had this kind of feeling for a long time. So I was not really excited to have great grandchildren. I have two now. One is 4 and one is 8. I love them to pieces, of course. Michael, in one of your presentations, I saw that you had moved to be near your great granddaughter. And obviously you are taking great joy in being with her. How do you let that joy of your grandchild prevail over the grief of knowing she is not going to have the world that you and I have enjoyed?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ethel. What comes to mind and what usually stays with me most days is that for every hour of pain or suffering that my granddaughter is likely to experience, I can say with confidence, she is providing and experiencing hundreds of hours of joy and love. And she just brings light to she's such a happy baby and such a, so I go back to what I said, what I share with young people is the recognition that we treat each season, each year as if it could be our last, just like most people who knew that they could die in a famine or a bad harvest or whatever. And and what I'm committed to is, to whatever degree it's possible, to whatever degree I have any influence, which is of course limited, I'm going to try to do everything I can to ensure that she has the best life possible for as long as possible. And I feel the same towards my 10-year-old granddaughter who lives in Texas. Obviously, I don't see her more than once a year or so. But nonetheless, as long as I can be of service in some way to my family and to my community, then I'm excited to wake up each day. And I don't fret or worry or stress out about the fact that I think it's quite possible that all of us on this call and all of the people that we love, our years are numbered. I don't think we have decades. I think we have years. And so let's live life fully and be the biggest blessing to others that we can be until the Grim Reaper comes for us.
Okay.
Gwen, do you have anything that you'd like to say in completion?
Well, thank you again so much for having me today. And I've learned so much from listening to everyone. And I just really appreciate all of you. And, I guess the main thing that I think about is that, when I say I do work in climate, that's just a framework, because climate and the changes that we're experiencing really encompass all aspects of our life and every sector of our life. And that can be really overwhelming. And so I always have to come back to myself. And, one of the things that I love to do the most is I live close to the river, and I like to run, and I like to take a minute and stop at the river and put my hands in the water and say a prayer. And, in terms of a reciprocity and understanding of that river, that's the same water that runs through my veins, especially because I am a Salish person that's lived in this valley. My family's been here since the beginning of time. Our creation stories are from this place. And so literally when I ingest this water, and that action of ingesting the food from this place and the water from this place and the air of this place, I really do come from this place. And so that water that I see running through the river is the same water that runs through my veins. It's the same water that's pumping through my heart. And in that way, it brings me back to myself in a very deep and profound way, and that I know I am from this place, and the essence of who I am is actually this place. And, I wake up in the morning and I need food, and I wake up in the morning and I need water. And again, I can't live without those things. And so this idea that I have that somehow I'm controlling or I have dominion over those types of resources is just, it's not real. And I think the most important thing that we can do, especially when it comes to children, I've got a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, is the most important work that I can do and that I can help them with is that I can start to look for new value systems, and I can start to help people understand new value systems. I can say very confidently that the value systems that we've built pretty much every foundational structure of Western society on at this point are crumbling before our eyes. And they're manifesting in these ways that we continue to see in the disparity and the social injustice and pandemics and just everywhere you turn. There is clear evidence that the value systems that we've used, which are incredibly patriarchal, they're ecocide, they're all these things. They're not the value systems, again, that are about mutuality, about reciprocity, about connection. They're not about, again, being of, rather, you know, the picture that we have in the value systems we have are very vertically integrated, with the top being complete dominion and control. And the problem with that is that when you're at the top, it's a really tenuous place to be, and you're constantly trying to step on people to continue to get to the top, and you don't even know you're stepping on, you can't see them because they're below you, versus something that's, again, more horizontally integrated, where I can see across and I can see you and I can hear you. And again, that goes not just to other people, but it goes to all the things that I am of. And so when I get a chance to go down to the river and I can say a prayer and I can put my hands in the water, the biggest gift, again, is the generosity of that gift that I can experience, and I can feel the cool water, and I can know and I can be reminded that that is me. It's actually me as well. It's a picture. It's a reciprocity. It's a picture of reciprocity, in that the minute I start disregarding and I don't understand that that river is actually me, and it's actually all my future generations, and it's also a reflection of all those yet to come that I come from and that I stand on the shoulders of as well, then I'm actually dishonoring myself. And so I just thank you again, and I will continue to do my work. And that's what I can say to all of you is there's not a lot you can do to change others, but the most powerful work that you can do is to come back to yourself in those ways and to understand your own divinity, so that then you're deeply embodied and you're deeply grounded in knowing how valuable you are. And then you can see that value in everything else. And so I just welcome people to continue to come back to yourselves. And thank you so much. And thank you to the other panelists again. I'm just so grateful and so honored to be lumped in with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. And thank you for being such a clear channel of what I call eco-theo, or kin-centric or life-centered land-honoring wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. We do, I believe, have a question, or yeah, would you like to share at this time? Yeah. Just okay. I might just go ahead. Let me see if I can go right ahead.
Great. Yeah, hi, Michael. Thank you so much for presenting. I've listened to probably 20 or more of your podcasts, and they've really contributed to my shift in consciousness. And I strongly feel that as the various symptoms of overshoot pick up steam around us, more and more people will be facing their own initiation and rite of passage, and hopefully being invited, hopefully engaging in inner work and self-transformation. And my question is about that, because I definitely have high certainty that techno-industrial society will collapse and continue to decline throughout my lifetime. I'm not as certain that humans will go extinct this century. And so for me, I'm trying to dedicate my life toward bringing about what I'm calling a paradigm of regeneration and care. So regeneration as in ecosystem restoration, mycoremediation, cleaning up heavy metals from soils, building topsoils, all these brilliant measurements for planetary and human health that you named. And that goes also to like economic degrowth, bringing about a gift economy, engaging inner work, all of these things. And so it's kind of like, we know where we need to go, but the question is how to get there. And the question I want to ask you pertaining to that is, do you think that we have to wait until industrial society breaks down in order to build a new system? Or do you see the possibility of a shift in human consciousness on a wide scale, and voluntarily building this new system, perhaps starting out as a parallel structure? It's in the minority, but then as everything else breaks down around us, it slowly gains traction and it becomes the majority way of doing things.
Yeah, what is your first name?
It is Ethan.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Ethan.
Ethan. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. I see really both. I mean, within the crumbling structure of industrial civilization globally are literally tens of thousands, probably millions actually, of examples of people who are trying to build local community, local currency, regenerate bioregions, regenerate ecosystems, reclaim indigenous practices, indigenous lifeways, in many cases to empower or to support or simply to give voice of encouragement to existing indigenous resistance, because most of the places around the world, most of the powerful, most prophetic voices to protect the land, to protect the water, to protect other species are still the existing indigenous peoples that have been marginalized for so long and have been experiencing apocalypse for so many centuries. So I think certainly that's happening within the structure, so that if any human beings are graced to survive this bottleneck, which I think there's a decent chance that could happen, they will absolutely need to reflect and will reflect pro-future indigenous kin-centric lifeways, because that's the only thing that evolution has ever selected for that is actually viable over the long haul. That's the only thing that will live in a mutually enhancing relationship with primary reality. So I think it's definitely happening. I don't think it's going to wait for collapse of civilization fully, because I think we're decades into civilizational collapse. We're decades into the decline and fall of the American empire, the industrial civilization. And there are literally tens of thousands or perhaps millions of small scale local. I don't think we'll ever see anything catalyzed at the global scale again, because we don't have the energy to make that possible. But I don't think that's healthy anyway. So yes, I think that's happening.
Very good.
I want to make sure that George gets a chance to share as well. Yes, Rabbi Laurie is still there. Okay, good. So I want to make sure that George and Laurie both get a chance to share. So, George, would you like to share anything in closing?
Hold on a sec. I'm not sure, but I think it's more Laurie's turn than mine.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to make sure both of you had the opportunity. I'm not tracking on who goes first.
Okay, Laurie is gesturing, I think, for me to go ahead, right? Okay. In answer to this gentleman's last question, I think we build the lifeboats now before collapse of the society, the small local eco-centered, not anthropocentric communities. Okay, so my future discussions with you, Michael, and others who have a different view of what we cannot change, and yours is based on science and mine is too. I just, here it is, the possibility of little survival pockets, where we can have these successful earth-centered new communities. And I for a long time have been saying, forget the national, the nation states, the global. We have to work outside of those systems to create any kind of viable futures. So that's an answer to this last young man's question. So that's what I'm working on. And I wrote a short answer to Karen's question about the children. And I say, as a lifelong teacher, a father of 4, grandfather of 7, tell the children the truth. That's what I've always believed. You don't give them false hope in a dystopian society becoming something other than it is. That would, okay. And so I try to teach my kids how to grow food, how to listen to the earth, how to take care of this land that we raised our kids on for the time after me and Barb are gone. I'd like to see that continue and see a viable community created here on this little 5-acre place, which is about probably big enough for a community of 8 or 9 people. I don't know. But anyway, that we have to model this. And old-time indigenous societies are one model. And models of people who have the courage to change from the other way back to earth-centered is what we need. So anyway, that's my slightly longer than I wrote on that chat for you, Karen, answer to your question. Tell the kids the truth. Tell them what's really valuable. Tell them that the society that school has been preparing them to be a part of is not going to exist.
And I love the fact that you also included teach them to live practically within Earth's ecosystem, honoring sacred limits.
That's it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you, everybody. I hope we can continue again sometime in the near future.
Yes, here. We are scratching the surface here. These are such good conversations to continue. I just wanted I'm going to be really brief. There's always this issue of languaging. And I know that in the concept of the post-doom approach, you say we don't need hope, we need courage. And with deep respect to you, I want to say I have hope.
Yeah.
And I do not abandon hope. And
Good.
here's why. In Hebrew, hope is tikva. It shares the same root with the word mikvah, which means to gather. And it also means the waters of the divine, the place where you immerse yourself completely in order to feel the divine. And so I have tikva, and I hope that it is a mikvah of the holy that can keep us going in spite of the uncertainties, in spite of the threats, in spite of the fact that we have to completely change how we view the idea of future. So in every moment we can be in a mikvah of a mayim chaim, of living water. So I just want to offer that respectfly.
Great, thank you. I greatly received. Thank you. That was perfect.
Thank you.
And I'm just noticing there were a couple of resources mentioned in addition to Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, Wendell Berry's poem, The Gift of Gravity. And also Salim mentioned the Joanna Macy's video that I just first saw for the first time 2 nights ago, Climate Crisis as Spiritual Path. And so that link is also there. And I fully agree. It's a fabulous, fabulous video. Well, John, I want to make sure that you've facilitated this whole thing. You ran the technology, anything that your heart would lead to share, brother.
Just a quick word of forgiveness for all the technological stuff. I have 4 cameras running and about 5 microphones, and I couldn't get them all to work. I'm sorry about that. It's the humility of this job and everything. But no, I just am delighted that we were able to pull this off. I think at least people were heard. I think the video also certainly churned thoughts. I'm extremely grateful for like-minded efforts, attitudes, and insights that helped me to grow in my awareness of what's going on in the world. I have such a limited view, and when I expand it to include the experience of others, I feel much enriched. And I hope everybody on this video, on this online chat and everything, receive the same blessing. So thank you all so much for what you've shared. I did have a closing thing that could wrap us up, appropriate. And this is just it's a meditation or a prayer. It actually comes out of a book, Faith and Worship. I don't even know if this is Methodist or not. I don't know. I just liked it. I thought it might speak to us, but I would offer this just as a way for us to close. And so in an attitude of attention towards the creator of us all, to the one who made all things, we ask that you give us a love for this, your world, and a yearning to be its stewards as you intended from day one that we should be. We have become blind. Help us to see. Open our eyes to all that we can do now in our own little way to make a difference for the greater good of all on this, our home, and your precious garden. Amen.
Amen. That's fabulous.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Yes.
Yes.
Wish you well, health and safety and blessings in the future. Whatever that future may be, may we have courage to face it.
Thank you, John. And John, I'm noticing this has been recorded. Can you send the link? Make sure that we get the link.
Yes, we recorded it. I noticed my Facebook did not did not function. So it wasn't on Facebook Live, but I have it recorded. So I'll get that actually placed on Facebook so that you can see it both places. So yep, we'll get that going.
That's great. Fabulous. Well, thank you all so much. This has been so rich for me.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, panelists.
Yes. Aho, Matakuyasan.
Take care.